Welcome in. We're going to call this meeting to order at 6:38 on June 12th, 2023. And this is a public meeting of the Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Transition Plan. If the Spanish language interpreters, Lizette and Ariel, can please give the information on Spanish language interpretation, that would be wonderful.
Ok. Esta es una reunión pública sujeta a la ley del estado de Oregon y las normas administrativas de la ciudad de Portland y se grabará. Tendremos interpretación en español para esta reunión. Cuando acceda a la interpretación en español, verá la transmisión de video de los oradores, pero la transmisión de audio será reemplazada por el intérprete. Para acceder a este servicio, haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas en los controles de la reunión de Zoom en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccione Español.
Thank you so very much. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Mary and Christine. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance, but please note this is an automatic captioning service and is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature as the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things. If attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings and agenda topics. We'd like to be clear, not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I'd like now to turn the meeting over to the co-chairs for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Faith. I'd like now to turn to our community agreements. They're on 3 pages, and I will ask a question on the 3rd page. please read silently to yourself as we go through these. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members in gently and with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in this space while still respecting the community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? Yeah, I see jazz hands or thumbs up. Beautiful. Thank you so very much. I will pass it over to the co-chairs to discuss the timeline now.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Catherine McDowell, one of the co-chairs of this subcommittee, and I use she, her pronouns. The Police Accountability Commission has split its work into 6 phases. We are now in the 5th phase of work, the transition plan and broader system. The commission will work until the end of August 2023 and will present its proposals to the City Council for their consideration and approval after it finishes meeting. Slide 8, please. This slide shows the outcome documents for the transition and broader system phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. Now that the PAC has developed a rough draft of what the new accountability and oversight system will look like, the PAC will in this phase develop a transition plan for how to get from here to there, an understanding of how the process of implementing the new system will change or interact with other police oversight systems and levels of government, and also will name the new oversight board and bureau. Our subcommittee is focused on the first of these tasks, the transition plan. Slide 9, please. This slide is the current project plan for the transition plan and broader system phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. This slide is for members of the public to understand how the commission gets through the end of this phase. Today's meeting falls into the green boxes with the purple border located in the lower middle section of the screen. Slide 10, please. Following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the Police Accountability Commission. We'd like to highlight a few of those, including our fellow subcommittees meeting on broader system, which is tomorrow, Tuesday, June 13th from 7 to 9. And then we meet again as a full commission this Thursday, June 15th, and we'll hear a briefing from the Portland Police Commanding Officers Association, which is a collective bargaining unit representing lieutenants in the Portland Police Bureau. Our subcommittee will meet again June 26th at 6:30 p.m. So this meeting tonight, we will start with a briefing with the Citizens Review Committee, and I just want to thank representatives from that committee for being with us tonight. After that, we will discuss the first draft of the transition plan after a brief introduction from staff and the co-chairs. We'll do a first pass through that document, including updates from drafting groups. And I just want to say we may jump around the document a little, and I think we will probably begin at the end and work back to the beginning, just to make sure that those sections, which we didn't have as much time to discuss in our last meeting, get our full attention tonight. And then, of course, we'll have a chance for public comment. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Moses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Catherine. I would like to welcome in Yumi Delgado as a representative from the Citizen Review Committee, the CRC. So we would like to have the briefing now, and we'll have 45 minutes to do this and invite you in.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. I think our chair, Candace Avalos, is with us here as well tonight.
Very good. I'm so sorry. I did not see Chair Avalos's name. I apologize, and I welcome you in.
Hello, good to see you all. You may are going to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So my name is Yumi Delgado. I am the vice chair of the CRC. I serve alongside Candace on the Citizen Review Committee. So we are happy to be here tonight to brief with y'all and answer any questions that you might have about the CRC's activities and perhaps our perspective. Shortly before the meeting, I did share with Samir a copy of a draft of the future portion of a memo that's going to be coming out from the CRC later this summer. So we are preparing kind of a retrospective report that looks at the CRC's activities over the past almost 20 years now, reviews relevant case history, and looks to the future in terms of things that we feel are unfinished business or things that we hope the future police oversight body has in store. This is meant as an institutional document, but we have shared it with you, or at least a draft of the portion that pertains to the PAC's work. So bear with me for a second here. I think Samir gave us a little bit of a guidance on what we're covering in tonight's briefing. So I think there were, and Dr. Moses, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are three or four sections in particular that this subcommittee had questions on, relating to transition volunteers, peer training, information from IPR, and then section F1, which I think is largely still in the works here. So bear with me while I get that document up, and we can tackle these individually here.
Gary,
So
if that's helpful for you. Would you like me to share it?
No, I think I have it. I have the PDF that you sent over. If there haven't been any changes to that, then we can go from there. So section B3 deals with transition volunteers. And yeah, Samir, if you want to maybe screen share, that would be awesome, because I think I'm not sure everyone else has this document in front of them. So our understanding, or my understanding from some of the documentation that we've seen thus far, is that there will be a volunteer body that assists with this transition process in addition to staff, and that one of the asks, or one of the lifts that CRC and IPR will be asked to make, is to assist in that transition and perhaps some training and onboarding for CRC members, which I think Candace can also weigh in here, but I think we would be happy to do that. Obviously, logistically, we are drawing our members from, kind of a diverse set of backgrounds and occupations. And so finding time to do that may be best done as sort of a roundtable discussion, or, maybe a dedicated day for some shadowing and some collaboration. I think one of the things that jumps out to me just reading through this proposal is, obviously, if there's a decision to be made for incoming new oversight body members to have access to case files, or to sort of audit a police review board or things of that nature, that's obviously something that has a little bit of a regulatory compliance component. So that's, that needs to be taken to, probably to arbitration or something along those lines. Candace, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add on this point?
I guess I'm just more a question of like, what is it that the comments here as far as a delay, like what can someone who wrote those comments explain what you worry about when you say you're concerned about the delay? I just want to understand that better.
Are there any hands? Co-chair Catherine.
Yeah, so Catherine McDowell, one of the co-chairs of this subcommittee, I think that what you'll see in the various comments that are in this document, which remains a working document, is that the PAC, once the oversight board is constituted, we have basically a year to stand up the board and be ready to take complaints. And so I think there's concern in terms of the steps that would be required, which is appointment of the new board. And we're envisioning a board of 33 members. So it's a large group of people that would need to be appointed. Then that group would in turn be charged with hiring the director, which of course will be a significant and important hiring. And then that director is the person in charge of hiring the staff. And so you can see, while if you start to map that out, a year could go by pretty quickly in terms of the appointment of a large board, the recruitment of a director, and then the director's hiring of at least the key staff required to be able to take new complaints. So I think as we have been talking through the transition, one of the things we've been looking at is how can we expedite or try to get a jump on the appointment of that board. And one of the ways we thought we could do that is by getting a transition team appointed quickly up front, so that transition team could really facilitate and oversee that appointment of the board. So then of course we worried, like, could we be running into delays for the appointment of the transition team? So if the comments around delay are all around how do we fit all this within the 1 year transition period. Does that answer your question, Candace?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think Yume's points are, I agree with Yume's points. Maybe if there's a way for you all to bypass city council in creating the transition volunteer group, I would encourage that as far as making sure there's no further delay. But and I think, yeah, it would, and I haven't been able to read everything super in depth, so my apologies. But I think if there's a way to understand the clear differences of the roles of this transition committee, because just at first glance, I'm not super clear about that. Especially if you're intending for this transition committee to have any kind of decision-making powers in the interim. And then I would just hope that these folks could be fairly or equally compensated for their time that you are expecting out of the futurely seated oversight board. So just understanding that it takes a lot of energy to do this work, and making sure that you're taking into account compensation on every part of this step for the people that are helping along the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think sorry.
No, go right ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think one thing that CRC will have to tackle once the system is moving into place is, I know elsewhere we talk about the possibility of CRC members applying for the new body versus staying on this body. And I think you on PAC are also having to determine, who's going to want to stay and who's going to want to go to a certain extent. I think if we're asking some people on the CRC, to consider applying for the new body, and we're asking some people on the CRC to consider applying for a volunteer board that will not be seated on the new body, just coming up with the timeline for that, and having those conversations, internally will be important. And I'm sure IPR will have similar feedback when they come to talk about staffing, right? Which is, I think, one of the main reasons that we're here tonight, is we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of where the PAC is going on that front, and that way we can support and also make sure that our own operations continue apace.
Wonderful. I think we should move on to section C2C.
Okay. And I think this actually, I apologize. I was reading my notes for C2. I didn't really have any real concerns about the B3 here. So for C2, I think I already said, I think the big question that I have reading this is just kind of what it is that their CRC is going to need to do, the lift that we'll need to provide, or that the volunteers that get tasked with this will need to provide. If there's a policy, if there's a sort of a policy advisory role that is going to be ongoing, or if this is more about working with incoming volunteers, kind of showing them how we do things, best practices, and functioning as peer support. I think those are two different roles. And I think in the latter case, that is probably something that should be a specific day or time, right? Just like I'm sure when all of you joined the PAC, I know for CRC, we had to do, there's a diversity training day, and there's a processes training day, and there's don't get the city sued day. And, that we could have something similar with CRC, where we say, okay, we're going to have a roundtable discussion, or we're going to have a day where you can meet one-on-one with a peer member. I think we would be open to doing whatever we can, as Candace mentioned, with the understanding that we are all volunteers and have other obligations. But you tell us what you need, and we will try and make sure that we can do that, within reason. Candace, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think to build on it, I would just encourage the PAC to think about, when you say you want training, right? Like, as somebody who does trainings and has, been an educator for a living, like, there's a lot of work that goes into developing a training. And from what I see here, at first glance, it's like you're asking for CRC and PRB members to do a training, but that would require so much pre-work, and we're all volunteers, and not all of us have necessarily the expertise to develop something like that. So I just would encourage you to think about what are other places that we could supplement it. It's just, if that's written somewhere else, then great. It's just what I'm seeing directly in this paragraph. Just would worry me about the capacity and the skill set needed to get the training you're looking for. So that's just the only thing I want to flag. I think absolutely we want to be part of the training process. And, I don't know. I think another kind of lingering question I have is, when does the CRC sunset? Because I'm not super clear on that timeline. And so I would just want to make sure that we're timing it right, so that CRC members are still there and engaged and active and able to take on some of these transition tasks. But yeah, so if you all have thoughts about where you're seeing CRC sunset, I think that would be helpful to take into account here, because at some point it's going to need to end, and I worry that that might not overlap well with your needs. That makes sense. And I, no doubt, like, at least I'll speak for myself. I will make myself available whether I'm on the CRC or not. But just big picture, I think it'd be important to take that into account.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry, Doctor.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Candace. That's so generous of you.
No. I think just having a clear ask for CRC is probably the most important thing. And then we can figure out if that's something that we can staff, right? As Candace points out, peer support, right? Me telling you what my experiences are, or talking to somebody is one thing, but training you on what my limited understanding of the current system or whatever is probably something that would be a heavier lift, and we would have to figure out if we have the capacity for, or as Candace points out, the expertise for. So you can tell I'm not a very good trainer or briefer, but I do have a lot of opinions. So
That's okay. I'm going to go to staff here, and then I'm going to go to Commissioner Dan.
Well, you're doing great. So don't sell yourself short here. But also, I just wanted to clarify, this might help give a little information. The section kind of mirrors the transition plan is kind of a combination of modifications to the main document that explains what it'll be like in the further out future. So it doesn't necessarily go into detail here, but what might be helpful to look at is there's staff training and there's peer training. And the staff training is all the stuff that peer training does not cover, and it's enumerated pretty in a different document, which is now showing on screen. And so these are all things that peer training in the further out future would not necessarily cover. And that might help give context to what the ask is for peer training, which would normally be from more experienced members of the board. But in the absence of more experienced members of a brand new board, would be something that the ask is. I don't know if that helps give context at all to what the section is of the transition.
It does, but I will say, just looking at this section, I think there's a gap of like how to actually review the cases and what you're looking for. And I'll just say the CRC does not get good training on that, by the way. We've kind of had to train ourselves, but I don't see that on the under section 1. And I see under section 2, it's just really vague. So that's one thing that just stood out to me right away of, who's going to be able to offer the ability to train on like the meat of this work, which is reviewing cases and knowing how to read the data. And so I just want to flag that. Let's make that clear who's doing that. I think city staff need to play a big role in that for capacity's sake, and then we can come in and round it out.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Dan.
Oh, good evening. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the commission, and you all know me. I go to your meetings a lot. So, yeah, I think what we were talking about, I was on the working group that helped draft up the training proposals, and I think we were thinking about exactly what you were just talking about, Chair Avalos, which is that you know how to look at a case file. You know how to compare that to police bureau directives. And whether it's the old system or the new system, doesn't matter, that the substance is the same, whether or not there's enough information in the investigation to prove or disprove the allegations. And that's the kind of training that I think we're hoping CRC can help the new board members with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Handelman. And then I'd say, let's make that explicit in that section under CRC.
Beautiful. Vice Chair Yumi.
Oh, I think Samir sort of answered my question here, but just confirming. So when we're looking at what the ask of CRC might be, it would be more in the realm of what eventually will become peer training, if I understand that correctly.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I think I echo what Candace said is, just tell us what you need and we'll make sure that happens. Although based on the structure that was enumerated in section B, it sounds like that will be a limited number of CRC members. Although again, if that's something where we want to ask all the 11 members to, have a buddy, that might be something we can do. We would just need to know what the ask is and what the time frame is.
Very good. Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Well, more so just one last comment that I think would be important, especially for the current CRC members. A lot of our current members are new and have had very little case file review experience because we haven't gotten many cases in the last couple of years. So we'll just want to, not all CRC members are created equal. And so we'll want to be strategic about who we're bringing in to do some of that peer training, because there are a lot of folks that just simply don't have the experience right now. And therefore that means that the, the burden of this bulk of this training is going to lie on an even smaller group of us. And so that's another reason why the expectation being clear is important, because I think it is going to be a big lift, especially because, like I said, we don't even really have good trainings. So I think there's a lot of what you all are asking for that doesn't necessarily exist and should exist and should be best practices, but we need to create it.
Thank you so much, Chair. Commissioner Angie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, to both of you. I have two questions, or the first one is there a way, I mean, you talked about having people shadow you. There is, I think, like a process document would be extremely helpful. And I know that you guys as volunteers probably don't have time to do that, but I mean, we might think about having somebody shadow you and take down notes and create process documents for you guys to edit, something like that, because that might be a really good use of time. And then the other thing that this doesn't totally have a lot, everything to do with this section, but Commissioner Lavisa and I wrote this section on transfer of information. And I just had a question about how you get your information. Do you actually, is everything just sent to you and you're supposed to go through a case, or do you actually get to request more documents? Or I don't know what that process is at all. And I'm not sure if I need to know that for right now, or if we need to include that in this document, but I think that piece is very important for me, at least.
I think I can answer that one for you, Angie. So to the first part, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I can tell you I'm much more willing to come and brief at a meeting like this, or sit down and talk with somebody about a process, than I am to write something. I write for a living, and so I do not like to do it as a volunteer if I can avoid it. But so I think that's a great idea. I also think somewhere in this document I saw mention of past CRC members, so that may be another resource that we can draw on. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the sitting 11 members who are filling out the last days of the CRC. As far as access to information goes, yes, all that the case file, as it's called, is provided to us. The process is slightly different for appeals than it is for the police review board. But in general, we're going to be getting a case file. In some cases, it's been so long since I've done an appeal, I'm having to direct my memory. I believe the appeal ones are redacted in some components. The police review board cases are not. For a police review board, generally speaking, we are not requesting any additional information, although you can consult with resources within the Bureau. So if I have a question about maybe how a policy is trained or interpreted, I could direct that to somebody at training division or professional standards, although that's pretty rare. For an appeal, we can request more information, but that essentially means that we're reopening the case. And so, or that we are asking the investigator to go back and add more information in the case file. There is a non-insignificant amount of a non-insignificant cost to doing that, both in terms of time and also staff hours, right? And so I think we try and be judicious with that. I remember the first appeal I did, we almost had to delay the case because there was a concern that we didn't have the right number of attachments in an email. And the formal solution to that is just to cancel the hearing and move it forward and say, okay, well, we'll send the case back for review and we will count the number of attachments in this email, and then we will reschedule that hearing. And I don't think as I think it's Jared from DOJ likes to say, justice delayed is justice denied. I don't think that's always necessarily the most efficient way to do that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Let me add to that though, because there is a period of time before we actually have the hearing where we can ask for more information. So yes, in some ways it reopens the case, but not necessarily in all. We do have the opportunity to clarify things ahead of time, and we're given by the IPR staff the opportunity to ask questions. I think part of it is that not people, there's a certain window by which we need to ask questions in order for us to get a response ahead of the hearing. That's not always done by our CRC members, and that's on us. So then we come to the meeting with all these questions, and then that's when things can get further delayed. So really, it's important that the people reviewing the files are reviewing things ahead of time so that they can get certain questions asked and answered and get certain materials that might be missing before we get to the hearing. And once you do that, then it is a reopen.
Thank you so much, Chair. So Lavisa, you are our last person on this section, and then we're going to move on to the section E. So go right ahead, Commissioner Lavisa.
Thank you so much, Candace and Yumi, for being with us. And I realized that in writing this, we have given CRC and probably you two in particular some jobs and some work. And I'm feeling a little concerned that we didn't really ask for your consent before giving you all of this work to do. And so I think I sort of wanted to ask, first, do you think that there is the capacity and the will in CRC to be a part of this transition process in terms of like peer training? And then also additionally, I know you've mentioned a couple of things that would be, helpful in terms of like what type of support CRC or other people who are providing these peer trainings could use, financial support, paying people because it's a job and it's real labor. And also maybe some staff support. But I guess I just wanted to ask, are there other types of support that you can think of that would help you? Because you're right, like giving a training or creating a training is an enormous amount of work.
Thank you, Commissioner Lavisa.
I think first and foremost, looking at the timeline, because if you're going to ask volunteers to produce any kind of thing, really giving us enough time, because we have day jobs that we have to do. And so I have to do all of this when I'm done with my long day at work or on my weekends, and I try to enjoy my life outside of CRC and work. So I think it's important to just consider how much time are you giving us to do certain tasks, and whatever you think is the amount of time we need, triple it, because it takes us a long time to get things done because, again, of being volunteers. I think compensation is really important. It is not a city value. It is a better value. That's my organization. We always compensate people for their time. Time is money. Time is valuable. So I think wherever you all can advocate for people to be compensated, we would appreciate that. And I think in general, it's just a good value to have as an entity that's asking folks for their real labor.
Thank you so very much. All right, let's go on to section E2.
So just to clarify, this got rewritten since the last time, and what was E2 became E3 in this draft. So I think the updated version was sent over after that list was created, but yeah.
Thank you so much.
I will defer to Candace on this if she has any input. I think that this is largely a question for IPR because we do not, CRC does not really function as much of a records holder. We are given stuff and then we use it. So y'all are welcome to all the first drafts of the memos we've put out, but that's about all we've got at CRC proper. But I think that's going to be a good conversation to have with IPR about what information, what records they're custodians for.
Yeah, and well, that is precisely why we are working on this big transition report, because a lot of it, especially on the transition past work group, you all got the transition future work group draft. In the past work group, our intention is to collect all of the information and put it in one clean place. I know before my time at the CRC, I have no idea what they were doing with documents. I have no idea how they were collaborating or anything, because if it's not in Google Drive, it doesn't exist, in my opinion. So we have a very robust Google Drive now that has a lot of information. That is a very easy thing for the CRC to pass along. But agree with you, May. All the other documents with IPR, that's how to go about.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Super quick so we can spend time with F1. Okay, let's move to F.
So if you scroll through this at any point, but show maybe the first half and then scroll through. That's okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Samir. So I have two kind of main points, main thoughts. I did read through all of this document yesterday. So I think one of the questions here is about the duration of time in which an appeal can be brought forth or a police review board would take place. And this speaks actually to Candace's point that we are not necessarily the best trainers. I don't know the answer to that question. I think IPR can answer that question for you, but we have kind of a murky understanding of our own processes in terms of when the appeal comes in, or when a complaint comes in, and how long that process takes, and how long the investigation will take, and how long the appellant has to appeal after we make a decision at an appeal hearing. So I've always heard 2 years, just vaguely based on some of the actual case files I've looked at, and I think some things I've heard IPR discuss. But I would ask them, what is the maximum possible duration when you look at the incident occurring, the complaint process, the intake process, investigation, findings, the appeal window, the settlement conference with the chief, and the possibility to appeal to city council. All of those have a window of time, and that can add up pretty quickly. So I would query IPR as to exactly what that time frame is. I think the other big question that exists in reading this document, aside from the broader system questions, which I know is another subcommittee, so I won't speak to that at great length here. But the other big question is, just how will this be managed? Obviously, somewhere in this document, there's discussion of the fact that CRC members could apply to be on the new body. They can also apply to be on the transition team. We also need them to keep doing their job, or at least we need 11 of them to maintain quorum. So I think having a thoughtful timeline as to, or I guess at least 7 of them in this proposal, having a thoughtful timeline as to how that's going to work, and how we make sure that the CRC is successful in their work. I think one of the things that occurs to me is, it seems like there has been a movement away from the idea of having a panel on the new body that hears CRC style cases, which I think is actually probably a fine idea, just because you don't want to be necessarily associated with that different appellate standard. But if that is the case, and you do want people from the CRC potentially to apply for the new body, perhaps there's a thing where it says, hey, we expect that a lot of you will serve out your terms, and in year 2 or year 3 or whenever that sunset date is, you can apply for those Class C or Class B terms or something. I think having some sense of how that's going to work would be very useful, and that'll help us with our recruiting and just staff management in terms of figuring out who's going to stay, who's going to go, etc. Sorry, that was a little word salady, but just in general, trying to get a sense of how that process is going to go. Candace, do you have any thoughts on this part of the transition.
Are you talking about D specifically? Or just in general, F1?
I think just in general, but if you have a specific point that you want to call out.
So I saw the staff note around the CRC members' terms who are ending. My term is the one that ends in 23, me and Vadim. And then right now we are currently doing, what is it? I guess review of applicants for other positions. We lost one CRC member recently, so we would like to fill that position, get us back up to 11. I think 7 is low. I wouldn't recommend keeping 7. I think you need to have it fully staffed. I don't think you should have a lower number because it's just really hard as it is to get to our quorum. And if you make it 7 instead of 11, it's going to be way harder. So keep the standard at 11. I think IPR does a good job of, or has in the last couple of years, of like keeping a pool of people. So I think it's said in here in not so many words, but maybe just making it more explicit that IPR shall continue to like keep a pool of applicants, you know, ready for whatever duration of time all of this transition will take, because I suspect that there will be people that will leave in between now and whenever this is done. So yeah, alternates. Yeah. So yeah, maybe just making that really explicit in here would be good. And you know, this section around F2B for as long as 2 years after the new system is in place. Yeah, that feels long. That feels kind of long. I don't have an answer for what's better. It's just my gut is telling me that that just seems like a long time to have people on retainer. So I don't know what to say about that, but that was just something that came to mind when I read that. I think that's it. Anything I said, Yume, that triggered anything for you?
Yeah, I think just echoing what Candace said, like I think she makes a really good point about the difficulty of keeping quorum. And I think as time wears on, obviously enthusiasm is a little bit less on the CRC. I don't think that's a deficiency. I think that's just a natural result of having a new system coming on board. People should be excited about the new system. I remember when I went to get my little city ID, the guy at the police bureau was like, are you on the new board? And I said, no, I'm on the old board. And then his face fell a little bit. But I think for us, really the big concern is just a timeline, because as Candace pointed out, we have to continue recruiting, and I have to tell people, what exactly are you getting into? And for those folks who want to potentially work in the new system, right, they're going to want to know, okay, well, if I volunteer for the CRC, does that mean I'm not going to be on the new system? Does that mean that I'm going to have to wait until there's a vacancy? How is that going to look? So I think I understand the reasoning behind keeping these two organizations separate and stood up apart, but that is a long amount of time, as Candace points out, because that also means you have to keep IPR staffed, and you have to keep a pool of PRB volunteers. And there's some statutory limits as to how long people can hear PRBs. As it stands currently, I'm a pretty new CRC member, and I'll be pushing up on my time limit, I think, to hear PRBs by the time this whole system is done, if I stayed on until 2027. So something to consider.
Dr. Moses, you are muted.
I am so sorry. Commissioner Dan, thank you so much, Yumi.
Thank you. So as it happens, one of the things I was going to bring up when we went over the full document tonight was an idea that came up when I was at the other subcommittee meeting, that we, in another document, the PAC said that we think that members of the new board shouldn't be members of other advisory bodies here in the city of Portland. But I'm thinking maybe we should make an exception for people who want to be both on the CRC and the new board, so that that staffing problem isn't as bad, right? So that the new board wouldn't be forced to use the old rules, but CRC members wouldn't be forced to make a decision whether they wanted to be on the old board or the new board. They could maybe be on both. So that was a proposal I was going to make anyway, and I see you nodding your head. I hope that seems like maybe a good solution. Thanks.
I do think that's a good solution. Yeah. I think we're also like, there's kind of a small pool of people who want to do this. Like, if I'm being honest. So I think where we can maximize and overlap and help, with the institutional memory is better. So I'm not saying you all are going to do a great job recruiting new people, but just knowing like we're in this weird no man's land phase of it, that I think we need more bodies, not less.
Any other questions, observations?
The only thing I was going to ask was, as far as the whole having this old system and this new system existing at the same time, I mean, I think it's worth considering. I don't know what the consequences of this would be, but where do you say, like, we are pausing new submissions, or we're pausing, doing anything with new submissions for some amount of time, hopefully not a long amount of time, but I think there should be a very strict cutoff, in my opinion, so that we're not having this weird, like, oh, well, we have this one case and it happened like later, now we're lingering, oh, we got to keep CRC on. Like, I just think having some way to do a clean cutoff, or like a clean, like, from this date forward, it's going to be only this group, and having that be as early as possible would be ideal.
Thank you for that observation. Appreciate that. Staff?
So just if no member has a question, I had a clarification question. Okay. Yeah. Do you expect the workload of the CRC to decline after the new cases are no longer submitted to independent police review, new complaints? There is a date that is not a set date, but like this entire document's based around that being there being a defined date at some later point. And how do you see it decline? I mean, it certainly will diminish at some point, but do you have a vision of how that might go if there was no entry to the system any longer?
Thank you, Steph.
Well, I think honestly, there already is a decline. We haven't had a case in a really long time. And it's not that IPR or IA hasn't had cases, it's that they're not coming to us, because again, since we're an appeal board, we get them only if the appellant is appealing the outcome that was originally determined. So we already don't have many cases. We've asked IPR over and over, there's none in the pipeline for us, right? So I don't know what that means necessarily. I feel like that's worth saying based on what your question is. So it might be actually easier to transition out, but that's CRC, that's not IPR. So that's a different caseload.
Yeah, just echoing what Candace said, I think we have already seen, I mean, appeals, our last appeal was what, a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. It was in 2021. That being said, I think the number of IPR complaints has remained fairly steady, and not to be too grim about it, but I believe the Portland Police Bureau will continue to use deadly force in encounters with civilians, which means we have to keep the police review board process staffed. So I think there's a component of that which will be pretty minimal. There's a component of that which is quite high. And right now, it's not every member of the CRC, but we are asking a lot of our members to review a lot of applications of deadly force currently. I anticipate that will continue apace, unfortunately. So I think IPR's work will continue apace until they have no more complaints. So I think that's something to mention. I know that we are about to hit time. I will hopefully stay on for the rest of this if anyone has any questions that they'd like me to answer in public comment. One thing I would like to just highlight, because I don't know that we'll be invited to brief our other body here, the other subcommittee, but I think the really big challenge here is not actually CRC or IPR. I think we are partners in this process with you. I think the big challenge is the broader systems, figuring out how this is going to work with collective bargaining, with the PPA, with the Commanding Officers Association, with internal affairs and all of that. I think that is the question that really keeps me up at night. And so if this is perhaps our only opportunity to speak to y'all, and I know some of you are at least audience members at that other subcommittee, I think that's a real question. It's not one that CRC is necessarily qualified to answer, but that's really where we're going to have to figure out what that looks like, because that impacts perhaps a less cooperative member of this ecosystem. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I have one more comment, which is to say, based on everything that I've said today, because we don't have many cases going on, we're working on this report right now. I would just say the earlier you can start telling us what those expectations are, the better, because we are sitting around right now with not much to do. And so this is a good time to utilize it. So, you know, when I said triple the amount of time that you're going to give us, if you all have at least, even if you could pump out a couple of things that you are wanting from us, we can start working on that soon. So I would just encourage you to identify some of those now, if you can, and send them our way.
Thank you so very much, staff.
Yeah, just for your knowledge, to take back, I think mid-July is a rough timeline for the final PAC approval of this document. And, you know, staff was helpful, you know, happy to give you the drafts, as you have been so kind with yours for us as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and visiting with us and giving us and sharing your wisdom. We're now going to take a 6-minute break. We'll come back at 7:40 and then go into looking at the transition plan. Thank you again so very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to continue our wonderful work here. So we are now going to move into discussing the transition plan and walk through the outline documents and some other resources if needed. For the first pass through the document, we'll be using the 5-minute rule, where any discussion or prolonged or proposed change that isn't resolved within 5 minutes gets paused wherever it is, and we move on without resolving it. After completing the first pass through the document, whether today or at the next meeting, we will circle back to resolve any remaining items. We ask that you follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated and remember to use the weighted stack in our discussions. Finally, please be forward-looking in our comments. And would the co-chairs like to get us started?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Good evening, everyone. I'm Faith Aiken. I use she, her pronouns. This evening, we are going to start reviewing in section F. So we've had a couple of passes with the overview of timeline, transition team and budget, initial member appointment and training, initial staff hiring and training. We're going to start with F and then get to E and then work our way up. So just to make sure that we get to review these more thoroughly. So Catherine, I can start in section F and then I'll pass it to you.
That sounds good.
Okay. So just to review what we're doing, I'm going to read these out loud. Some of you have had a chance to look at these, some of you have not. And if you have thoughts or questions, Dr. Moses is going to help facilitate the conversation.
You got it.
Okay, section F, post-transition period. F1, general IPR CRC transition. A, at the beginning of the post-transition period, IPR will no longer accept new complaints. They will continue to work through any complaints accepted prior to the end of the transition period. As their work winds down, the IPR director, along with the Bureau of Human Resources, will determine how to reduce the size of the organization to match the workload. B, the director shall ensure that IPR staff have preference in hiring for employment at the new Oversight Bureau, as long as they meet all additional criteria for Oversight Bureau employment. When hiring current IPR employees for positions at the Oversight Bureau, the directors of the Oversight Bureau and of IPR shall coordinate so that IPR maintains continuity of operations.
Any questions? Comments? And we move on. Thank you so much.
Okay, C. The CRC will continue to hear appeals until the last ones initiated under the old system are completed. This ensures that the Oversight Board does not hear cases using older procedures and standards. D, the city will maintain at least 7 of the allotted 11 members of the CRC so that they can hold hearings with a quorum of 5 and participate in PRB hearings where CRC members are required. CRC members who wish to apply to be on the Oversight Board shall announce their intention once the application process is opened.
Any questions? Yes. I'm going to go with Commissioner Charlie first.
I figured the other 2 hands that were up before me are going to ask the same question. Are we going to go with more than 7? As both of the CRC chairs suggested?
Wonderful question, Charlie. Thank you so much, Commissioner Co-Chair Catherine.
So I think that this is flagged. There's a flag, and I think a little bit further down in terms of just the discussion. This premise that I think we need to discuss is this idea that we are going to keep the IPR and CRC system, basically the current system, in place until all cases filed in that system have been heard. And I guess we're using sort of as a working assumption that could be up to 2 years. And when we originally did the timeline, I think we just did sort of the filing date of basically the beginning. Our initial proposal on this was that we would begin once the Oversight Board was taking cases, IPR would sunset, IPR and CRC would sunset after 180 days. So you basically would use the kind of 180-day period, which is the current period for IPR to conclude their cases, as kind of the presumptive sunset period. So it's a defined period, certainly shorter than the 730-day period that would a 2-year transition plan would contemplate. And I guess I just think that's a fundamental question we need to decide. I guess I just feel like the document has kind of moved forward with an assumption that that we're all agreeing that the current system should remain in place redundantly with the new system for up to 2 years, or as long as it takes individual cases to be heard. And I think there's a different way to approach it, which is you allow some transition period, say 6 months, which is the 180-day period presumptively where cases are investigated, and then cases that are still in the system do get transferred to the new system and then just have to be managed separately to ensure that, you know, whatever due process is required to cure those is accorded, but presumably they're not going to be a ton of them. And so, I mean, it's a pretty fundamental question I think we need to address. Do we keep the old systems in place for what are presumably a very small number of cases, or do we just say after this period of time, all those old cases get folded into the new system? They have to be managed as old cases, but they're part of the new system. And I think the reason for doing it that way would be because it's pretty confusing to have two systems in place for an extended period of time. And the reactions that we've seen both from IPR and CRC when we've said this could be up to 2 years, or that's a really long time to try to manage sunsetting agencies. People, when, you know, when they know an agency is going away or a bureau is going away, that's just hard to keep it going. And I think the idea of trying to keep the old system going in an overlapping way to the new system for that long, at least in my mind, for, you know, to do that for what I think is going to be a fairly small number of cases, I personally don't think that makes sense. I think we should have set a date and then just have after that date, all the old cases go to the new system. So I just want to put that out there. I think that's the discussion. But I guess I want to say I want to back up and have it, because I feel like we've sort of moved forward with an assumption that we are going to keep the old systems going redundantly as long as it takes. And I just want to have that discussion, because I personally don't think that's a practical solution. And I don't think politically it's going to fly, also just because of the budgetary issues associated with redundant agencies. So that's what I just want to put out there, and happy to hear the other viewpoints, but I guess I just think we need to talk about that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, co-chair. Okay, so Commissioner Dan, does your hand up speak to that question directly? It does. Okay, then yes, let's have that conversation for the next 5 minutes. And so be brief. And so if as many people can speak to this as possible. So Commissioner Dan, pretty please.
Right. I thank the co-chairs for posing this question. I think there's a third way, and I think, unfortunately, we can't control it, and neither can the city particularly. But the third way is to negotiate with the collective bargaining units that any case that gets moved from the old system to the new system uses the rules of the new system when that happens. You know, we're operating under this assumption that I brought up at the last meeting, that if a complaint gets filed or if a shooting happens under the old system, it has to be processed through the old system. Well, it doesn't have to be if you make an agreement that it doesn't have to. So that would be the only way I would think would be, in my mind, acceptable for the community at large that's expecting a system that's going to hear all the cases that are being investigated by non-police investigators, that are being the final findings and the disciplines being handed out by the review board members, and that where they're not making recommendations to the chief, that they're making the decisions themselves. So I think that, to be fair to those members of the new board, to the people who are involved, that's a way to resolve that problem, is to encourage the city to negotiate that. So that's just a proposal I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Charlie.
Well, I just want to ditto everything Commissioner Dan just said, but also if that is not a possibility, I guess we have to look at that as well. How do we assure community that why we're doing this, why we're still potentially having police. That's just a huge concern for me, that I would like to hear any suggestions then, like how to go about that.
Thank
This is community centered, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Commissioner Charlie. Commissioner Monica.
I was just going to say that I brought this up on our last meeting, that I am concerned that having these two systems working at the same time is going to harm the reputation of our new system. For 2 years is a very long period of time. And I think we really have to think about that. So I really like the idea of having a date where there's a hard stop. I think 6 months is reasonable. I mean, yeah, I think that's what I would hope to see.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Tim, and then Co-Chair Faith.
Thank you. Yeah, super briefly. I think in a perfect world, I would love if we could somehow have both systems running for all the reasons that have been outlined for people or by people already. But I do think it was really interesting to hear Candace and saying specifically this evening that they sort of have all the time in the world right now. And, we'd love to help you. We don't have any cases. And then the thought of stringing out systems that might be taking up people's time that could really be engaging in the new system does concern me. So it makes me rethink the need to have a longer transition turnover period like that, because I think there's just not enough people to do all the work is kind of my concern. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Faith, you're going to wrap us up here.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with a shorter transition period. I do think that adds maybe some more complexity to the training section of this transition plan, and maybe we'll deal with that next week. But if we are to shorten the way that the training, I think, is currently written, is under the assumption that we are training just on the new system. But if we have new board members providing, everyone understands what I'm saying. I don't need to explain it. So I am just flagging that we should discuss if we are shortening the transition or the sunsetting period, that we need to discuss the training in that handover.
Thank you so much. Let's continue on. We've done our 5 minutes here.
Okay, thanks. Okay, F2, transition items related to PPD. Should that say? The PRB will continue to hear cases until the last ones initiated under the old system are completed. Question TBD, discussing. This ensures the oversight board does not hear cases using old procedures and the standards. B, IPR shall ensure that the pool of PRB community members shall be sufficient to hold police review boards for as long as 2 years after the new system is in place, TBD. At the beginning of the post-transition period, the oversight board will accept those types of complaints currently addressed by internal affairs, but which the new system directs to the oversight board.
Questions, concerns, observations, staff?
Yeah, I think, and if someone wants to correct me if I'm wrong here, that this is basically part of the same conversation that was just flagged. If there's a reason that it should be different, that might be worth pointing out, but than IPRs. But yeah, otherwise, we just consider the question of the 2 years to be part of that same conversation we just had the 5 minute one.
Is that okay, co-chairs?
Yes, I think it's all of these items are related.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Dan?
Well, I wanted to point out that this new section C that was just introduced for this meeting seems to address the sunsetting of internal affairs that we're going to hear back from the other subcommittee about at some point. But just, I know we're not doubling back to the entire old conversation, but the CRC's part of this police review board process is the part that I think is going to concern most community members, because the police review board hears deadly force cases and the CRC does not. But one CRC member has to sit on every police review board that has to do with a deadly force case. And those cases are the ones that the community cares most about, I believe. And those are the ones that, if they go to the new board and are handled under the old system, and the new board has to make a recommendation to the chief, is going to hurt the credibility of the new system even more than having two systems going at the same time for 2 years, in my opinion. So so in order to make sure there are CRC members to be on the PRB, you have to keep the CRC around long enough to feed the PRB. That's what I'm getting at. And you may have seen in the chat, I put that the IPR's most current oldest case is 342 days old. So this 180-day timelines are mostly met, but especially not met with the deadly force cases. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Staff?
Hi, yes, just to clarify, Part C does not relate to that. It could, if that's what the recommendation of the other subcommittee is, relate to the sunsetting, if that hasn't been determined yet. If Internal Affairs will sunset or not, they haven't yet had their first conversation of the draft. However, there are types of complaints which, the idea in the officer accountability document from the PAC was that there would be more cases going to the oversight board than just the IPR ones. There'd also be the cases that would otherwise be investigated through Internal Affairs. And so the Part C just relates to the date of when that would happen. The other point is in the Q&A, there was a comment from Vice Chair Yume about the timeline, and put that in the chat. It's the oldest PRB cases from August 2021. Thanks.
Thank you so much, staff. Any other questions, comments here? Can we move on? Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
So just to flag that in the event that there isn't a hard and fast date, there was a header created here just to allow for like a criteria based thing that probably will be erased unless someone proposes text. We can move on to Part E.
Thank you so much, staff. Co-chairs?
Okay, so I think that's me. Subsection E deals with transfer of files and information from current systems. And these are, this is a new section that was not in the document previously. So I'll read it through, and then if Angie and Lavisa, who were the subcommittee, subcommittee authors of this section, have comments to explain it before our discussion, that would be useful too. Okay, so E1 says Portland Police Bureau and other City of Portland transfer of information. Subsection A, the Oversight Board will have the authority to obtain information to provide an administrative response to allegations of misconduct and to conduct oversight effectively. The methods for obtaining information will include, but not be limited to, compelling testimony, subpoena power, and access to police records, data, and body camera footage. B, during the transition period, the transition team will have access to all information and data related to cases being reviewed by IPR, Police Review Board, and the Citizen Review Committee in an effort to train the transition team. The transition team will assist in the training of incoming Oversight Board members and staff.
Any questions or comments here?
Thank you, staff, for including that note, that I did take that directly from the access to information areas of agreement document.
Commissioner Dan and then Commissioner Monica.
I'm a little actually concerned about having the transition team having access to these case files. I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent was for just the people doing the training who already have the clearance to have access to those files. So the CRC and PRB members doing those trainings. I don't know if the entire, like the staff people who are organizing the logistics behind the transition need to be able to access case files, because it's a different kind of skill set. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Monica.
I think I'd like to focus on what our CRC member, Mr. Delgado, was saying about putting so much training, effort, and time into a transition team that is just transitioning and then passing information from one team to another. There may be a good bit of information that does not get transferred adequately. I'm a little concerned about that. I think that was brought up by them, and I think we should really think about how we can make this this transfer from one system to the other possibly not include that much of a transition team.
Well, I'm going to suggest, Commissioner Monica, that we bring this up again in section B, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Faith.
Yeah, I think I agree, Commissioner Dan, just about access to files. I think as we're imagining the transition team, TBD, there are the proposal to have some PAC members on that transition team, and I don't think that they would need access to files along with staff, as you pointed out. So I think that maybe this, I'm putting a pin also in Monica's comment, is that maybe some reworking of the transition team and roles and responsibilities based on membership. If I were to be on the transition team, I wouldn't want to have access to files. So yeah, I think considering who should have access to what makes sense.
Beautiful. Thank you, Commissioner Faith. Let's continue on to E2, please.
Okay. E2, transfer of information from the Police Accountability Commission. All information and data collected by the PAC will be transferred to the transition team upon creation of the transition team. All information and data collected by the PAC and the transition team will be transferred to the Oversight Board upon creation of the Oversight Board. In the event the transition team and Oversight Board exists concurrently, all information and data collected by the transition team will be made available to the Oversight Board on an ongoing basis. And subsection B, the PAC values and goals, the PAC bylaws, and the PAC community engagement framework will be given to the Oversight Board members as model documents to assist in creation of the Oversight Board's internal process documents.
Any questions, concerns here? Can we move on? Oh, Commissioner Dan.
Sorry, there's so many different versions of this. I'm trying to wade my way through. I sent in some comments earlier today. I'm a little confused about the process behind this document because we didn't have a whole lot of time to review it. But I had brought up a couple of times the idea that a specific set of bylaws be given to the board so they can function for the first month or two while they're coming up with their hiring the director. And I just initially put out that the PAC would draft that, and I understand that it's not something we need to do. It's something the transition team can do. So my proposed language, I guess I'll paste it into the chat, and I don't know why it didn't necessarily get brought into this document by staff. But it says the transition team shall prepare a set of bylaws based on the PAC to allow the new board to function as soon as it is established. Once the board has approved the director's job description, they shall adapt these documents as desired or create new ones. And so I guess, just to put a finer point on it, we don't want people sitting around for the first 2 months saying, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? How are we going to make decisions? How to make decisions about how we're going to make decisions? Instead, we'll hand them some documents. They'll be very thankful for us doing that. They'll figure out how to make, decide what the director's job description looks like, send that out, and then they can go back to it and fix it and say, you know what, that really didn't work for me the way that we have it. Let's fix this. That's what I'm suggesting to help speed this whole process up. Thank you.
Beautiful. Commissioner Charlie? You're on mute.
Click. All right, took me 3 times to click on it. Once again, I want to ditto what Commissioner Dan is saying. I really feel adamant and about the values and goals also being something that they would use the first initial months of when hiring the director, and to guide them to stay on track, right, of what this whole everything we're doing here. So yeah, thanks, Dan.
Beautiful, thank you. Any other comments, questions, observations? Commissioner Angie.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to go back to, yeah, I agree that it would be great if we were able to prepare a set of bylaws. I hope that they will, putting in this document that we will be transferring the values and goals, the bylaws, the community engagement framework is an effort to try to get them going as soon as possible, but also let them have some sort of guidance. And I'm not sure, if that is, I know that it took us a long time to create our bylaws and our, and our values and goals. So I hope that this will help them, but I also don't know if we're overstepping, what we want them to do and telling, and not letting them create their own information. Thank you. Process documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Angie. Staff?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Angie said most of that's covered most of the points there that we're going to mention about what's in the scope regarding the PAC's work, and there's no council authorization to write bylaws for the new oversight board. That has nothing to do with this text, so not a statement about this text at all, just about the overall idea, but rather to propose a code change. So again, no issue raised from the perspective of the proposed change here at all. But yeah, in terms of what's in the documents from council, and that's something that council can probably give some more guidance on, or attorneys as well. But yeah, again, completely not relevant to the proposed text. Just wanted to flag it. Thank you.
Commissioner Dan, you're wrapping us up on this area.
Okay, I really strongly disagree with that assessment. They asked us to come up with a transition plan. If we say part of the transition plan is creating bylaws to make this thing move faster, then it's part of what they've asked us to do. So it doesn't, not every single thing that we've done was explicitly written in the charge given us by City Council. They asked us to come up with a transition plan. I'm suggesting this be part of the transition plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Tim? Okay, and then staff?
Again, no issues with this proposed text in the slightest. Just wanted to make that super clear. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, let's move on. Can we move on? I see some thumbs up. Let's move on.
Okay, subsection E3, information from IPR, Police Review Board, and Citizen Review Committee. During the transition period, IPR, the Police Review Board, and the Citizen Review Committee will transfer all information and data used in previous complaints to the Transition Team / Oversight Bureau. The transfer will follow all applicable local, state, and federal laws and policies regarding privacy and transparency. Subsection B, in the event that the transfer of information and data from these agencies cannot be completed in the transition period, the Oversight Bureau will work with each agency to create a plan to transfer information and data within a reasonable time frame, not to exceed 1 additional year.
Any questions, comments? Can we move on? Very good.
So that concludes E.
Yes. Section D.
Okay, section D. Initial staff hiring and training. D1, director hiring. As soon as a majority of board members have been appointed by City Council, the search for a director will commence. A draft job listing will be prepared by transition staff for review by the board. Then transition staff will post the job and conduct community outreach so the community is aware of the position. Transition staff shall share these applications with the board. The board will then follow the standard procedure to hire the director. D2, priority staff hiring during transition period. A, once the director is hired, they will work with transition staff to recruit staff applicants for the Oversight Bureau. B, the director will prioritize the hiring of intake staff and investigators to ensure the Oversight Board is able to begin receiving and investigating complaints by the end of the transition period.
Any comments, questions, suggestions? Commissioner Charlie.
I was wondering if I could get a definition of the difference between staff and team.
Co-chairs?
Transition staff versus transition team.
Yeah, I think in my mind, the transition team has been made up of the volunteer body that we've talked about. So former PAC members and staff and former CRC members and miscellaneous. Staff is paid by the city of Portland.
Is that clear, Commissioner Charlie?
Okay, so transition staff is everyone, I guess is what I heard, including
Inverse, Charlie. Transition staff would just be staff, like the way that CSD is our staff, whereas the team would be the staff plus the volunteers.
Okay. Commissioner Faith, Co-Chair Faith.
I just wanted to include the word or navigators in D2B. So we'll prioritize the hiring of intake staff, navigators, and investigators.
Thank you. Commissioner Dam.
Well, kind of getting to Commissioner Michelle Wesley's question, I think the draft job listing should be drafted by the transition team, and that the community members should have a hand in that. So not just the staff in drafting. Posting the job, fine, staff can do that. Then the prioritizing of staff section, if the transition staff is helping the director recruit people and also is interested in having a job, which is listed later on, it should make sure that the people who are doing that don't have a conflict of interest. and they should probably announce that their intent to get hired if that's the case. And in the second part, D2B, I think I mentioned this before, but the board is to and be involved in hiring some of the staff as outlined in the officer oversight staff document. And even though it may be listed somewhere else, I think it's helpful to put it here as a reminder so that if the director starts hiring, say, the legal counsel during that period, that the board is involved in that as intended.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Dan. Any other comments? Can we move on? Very good. Let's continue forward.
D3 staff training. The transition team is responsible for ensuring the director undergoes training upon hiring. B, the director is responsible for ensuring all other oversight bureau staff, all other oversight bureau staff undergo required training upon hiring.
Any comments, questions? Commissioner Dan?
So I mean, it occurs to me that the board members will have up to a year where they're not hearing any cases because the staff won't be in place and won't have taken in their first case yet. So we'll have a lot of time on their hands to do things like rewrite their bylaws and their other founding documents. But they should also have time to help design the training for the director, as they are going to be overseeing the director in the future to see whether or not they're doing a good job. They can hire and fire them, right? So I think that the board's members should be part of that training design as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Any other comments? Can we move on? Very good. I see hands. Thank you.
So that concludes section D. I'm going to scroll up to section C.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Also, could you hang on for just a second, co-chair? Staff, do we want to take another break? Is this a natural place to do that?
Sure. Up to you.
Well, I didn't know if we needed to have 2 breaks during this longer session.
Not necessary, but it's your call. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then let's do it. We're going to take 5. We'll come back at 25 after. Thank you so much. All right, we'll continue on in the document. Thank you. Section C.
Okay, section C, initial member appointment and training, C1 member appointment. Applications for board membership will be available beginning at latest in month 1 of the transition. Transition staff will manage the application process and conduct outreach to the community. Subsection B, transition staff will review applications. The transition team will submit to the City Council a set of eligible candidates to consider. C, Council is requested to determine appointees within 4 weeks. The City Council shall review the applications and then will notify transition staff of desired appointees so that appointment can be placed on the council agenda at the next opportunity. Appointments made before January 1st, 2025 will be made by the full City Council, including the mayor and 4 commissioners. Appointments made after January 1st, 2025 will be made by the vote of the 12 members of the City Council. Shall I continue or?
Let's do that. Set those first 3 sections.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Any comments, questions? Commissioner Charlie.
Same as before. Is it should it be on B, C1B, transition team will review the applications and submit to the city council? Or maybe then staff can submit them. Should it be reversed? Or, I don't know.
With our previous definition, I would guess that it would be staff. Because the volunteers aren't there yet. But maybe that's incorrect. Commissioner Dan.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, trying to cool things off in here. It's 88 degrees in here. I believe that I agree with Commissioner Michelle Wesley that this would be a good place for the team to be involved in reviewing those applications for the board, so that we have community members having their eyes on those applications. I also, this is kind of a broad comment, and I know we have no control over this, but I think we're asserting on the one hand that if the city council doesn't let all this stuff happen before they vote on the package, then everything's going to get delayed. But at the same time, sort of saying the application will be available beginning at the latest in month 1 of the transition. I think we should be much clearer and more assertive about, they should be available during the the pre-transition period, but no later than the beginning of the transition period. Does that make sense? So we're being really clear about, we want this to happen early.
Okay, is that the language that you want in there, Commissioner Dan?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Angie, then Commissioner Faith.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around who is going to write the descriptions for the board membership. Is that going to be us? Or is that, just trying to get my head wrapped around that, because we have to go from A to B to C. And I guess I'm trying to put this all on a timeline that I can look at, and I'm trying to understand that. Is that something that we need to put in there, that the PAC will create that board membership description? I'm not totally sure about that. And then also, I really want community involvement in this too. That is very, very much something that I want. But I also think that the language that says transition staff will manage application process and conduct community outreach conduct outreach to the community. I almost think that needs to be really clear, crystal clear, or we need to supplement it with something else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Angie. I'm gonna go to co-chair Faith and then staff.
Yeah, I was struggling too, Angie, and then I remembered we wrote down who we want the board members to be in our board membership areas of agreement. So I remember that we flagged it of wait a second, we need to make sure that all of these questions make it in, or all of these characteristics are asked somehow in an application. So I think this is the how, not thank God we did the what already. So, oh, and I had another point. I had another question earlier. I'm gonna have to come back. I don't remember.
Okay. Any other staff?
Just to follow along with that, taking what's in code, which is what for the board membership text will end up being in code by this point. Or near in code at this point, depending on when it happens. And then actually getting that into the city's different questions and structures so that it can be posted online is sort of the implementation side of that, the way that it's written right now. So that's what the assignment currently is as written. But we can obviously change that.
Thank you, co-chair Faith.
Apologies, I remember. I wanted to respond to Commissioner Dan's comment about having in sort of more precise language around timing. I agree. And I think one of the things that we were feeling nervous about is being able to release board applications prior to everything being finalized. And so I'm assuming that, well, no, that's why the language is the way that it is we'd like for it to just be like ready to go. I would love to start recruiting now, but we don't know what, if there's going to be substantive changes that then city council. So that's why the language is what it is. Yeah.
Commissioner Angie, does that feel like a good answer to you?
Thank you so much. I actually just opened the areas of agreement on board membership because I want to make sure that it's clear in my head what's going on. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Great. Any other thoughts, comments? Can we move on? Very good. Section D.
Okay, section D, the application may remain open and the transition team will continue to review applications and submit new candidates to city council regularly to fill any member positions unable to be filled in the first appointment or to appoint alternates. Subsection E, board members appointed during the transition period will be appointed for terms lasting the remainder of the transition period and an additional 1, 2, or 3 years, such that 1/3 of the board, 11 members, will have terms of 1 year, another 1/3, 2 years, and another 1/3, 3 years. Board applicants may select their preference of term length, and the transition team will do their best to accommodate first or second preference in the batch of applicants sent to City Council. The transition team shall also prioritize board member selection requirements in each group of 11 candidates to ensure diversity. Subsection F, board members will begin to receive member support upon appointment. It is anticipated that different parts of the member support structure will take effect at different times, with some portions not taking effect until after the transition period.
Any comments, thoughts, staff?
Just for clarity around that last point, the board membership document, the areas of agreement on board membership have a member support structure, which includes that a portion of member support and compensation would be based on their participation in panels. The panels would not start until after the transition period ends. So that's an example of what that refers to. Just for anyone who may need clarity on that. Thanks.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Charlie.
Yeah, I was looking for clarity on that F as well. Board members will begin to receive member support. So we're talking about the board members, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or could we just say board members will begin to receive support upon appointment? I get easily confused with all this, and I think vagueness could be really not not a good thing for us to keep that in mind throughout this document, all documents. That vagueness could really be a problematic, especially when there are those who would like to undermine us. So is that what we're talking about here? The board members support?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Everything just starts swimming around in my head. So sorry.
It's okay. Not a problem. Commissioner Angie.
Thank you. And it's not, I'm so sorry, it's not directly related to this piece, it's related to the previous piece, because I did go back in to look at the areas of agreement for board membership. And I do think that we need to be really specific about how the descriptions of these the initial board members are going to be written, because that can take a lot of time in the city process. And I just don't want it to stifle what we want them to do in their first year. So, or in that, that quick transition period. So that's just my comment. Thank you. I don't know if this is garden plot or what. I'm sorry to go back to a previous section though.
Staff, do you want to make notes at the previous section? So.
Yeah,
Commissioner,
yeah, happy
where-
to make them out, thanks.
Yeah, where would you put that note?
Yeah, I can type in the background while the next person speaks, but
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
it'll be
okay.
it'll be in CONA, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Commissioner Dan.
I appreciate Commissioner Tomlinson bringing that section back up because I was trying to raise my hand before we left it to say the description for the board members can be based entirely on what's in the charter. And then it can also have sections that say, according to a plan that has yet to be adopted by council, so these other elements may change, these are some of the things that you might expect. So that way we can, the transition team can be grounded in something that's written in the city charter and can't change by the city code. So that was one of my comments for that. For this part, to address Commissioner Michelle Wesley's concern, I think that section E, maybe we want to say board members will begin to receive compensation and other financial assistance upon appointment. So that's, to me, it's the word support that without the other documents in front of you, it's not clear what that means.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Any other comments? Questions? Can we move on? Very good.
C2, initial board training. After council appointment, subsection A, excuse me, after council appointment, board members and alternates shall go through training. Subsection B, training that would normally be organized by staff may be delivered by transition staff and or by experts and affected parties. Subsection C, peer training, which normally will be conducted by one or more existing board members, will be done by members of the CRC and civilian members of the Police Review Board, PRB. After completing training on handling of confidential materials, the new oversight board members review case files and will review case files in CRC appeals and PRB cases, consider the findings in those cases, and attend hearings without interfering as a part of their training on how to review complaints.
Any thoughts? Questions, concerns? Commissioner Dan?
So the work group that developed the training section had a goal that was in here, and I don't see it like redlined or represented anywhere. I think it would be good to put that goal back in here. I'll try to grab it and put it in the chat again.
Thank you.
And referring to our earlier discussion, the part about peer training, the training will be done by current and former members of the CRC and civilian members of the Police Review Board. Just to get back to what we talked about with the co-chairs there, or the chair and vice chair. And I just want to put in an extra thank you to the co-chairs for designing the first year not to be a full year necessarily for a term, but just however long it is between the time they're appointed and the time that year one starts. I think that's a good solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or suggestions? Staff?
Just a question for Commissioner Dan on that last point, if that was something you wanted noted in there, the 1 year, and if you could repeat it a little bit slower. So
I was just thanking the co-chairs for their work on, there was the previous section.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Can we move on? Thank you. Let's go to B. Transition team and budget access.
Okay. B1, general. A, the initial implementation of the transition plan will be managed by a transition team that includes staff and volunteers. B, the transition team shall assist in initial oversight board staff and member training and initial organizational tasks. The transition team shall, as outlined below, coordinate city council appointment of the initial 33 oversight board members so that appointments may be made promptly upon creation of the oversight board. C, many of the necessary tasks for board implementation can begin prior to the beginning of the transition period. These tasks may include 1, developing internal city capacity for the recruitment process, drafting board application, and ensuring legal compliance. 2, coordination between bureaus. 3, creating a necessary city infrastructure for future board members. Having IT permissions, protocols, and files in place.
Thank you so much. Comments, questions on this section? Commissioner Dan.
I just have one. It's in B, where it says the initial 33 oversight board members. I think we should add and 5 alternates, because you all may remember, or maybe not, but I had to work with this person, that there was somebody that was part of our commission in the first month and a half or so, and then they weren't able to continue. So I foresee that kind of thing happening, where some of the 33 might fall off in the first couple of months. So it'd probably be a good idea to appoint the alternates right up front as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? Can we move on? Oh, Co-Chair Faith.
Sorry, I don't know, maybe it's in the next section down, but I want to come back to Commissioner Monica's point earlier around the transition team. Monica, will you talk about your pause a little to see if maybe some of this text needs to be altered?
Yeah, I guess my concern mostly is how long this transition team is going to be operating, how much information they're going to be getting, and how much information they're going to be transferring over to the actual board and the system that we'll be putting in place. So yeah, I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
Okay, well, as we continue through B, just let me know, jump in, and we'll continue on if that's all right. Okay. We can continue on.
D, the transition team shall be appointed during the pre-transition period, during the Department of Justice and Judicial review of changes to the settlement agreement and proposed city code related to implementation of the oversight board.
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Dan?
So I had a comment on the definitions, which we're going backwards to, but it relates to this part, and maybe if you accept my proposal, this needs to be reworded a little. The pre-transition period really has 2 subsections. Part 1 is between when we give City Council the code and when they give it to the DOJ, and Part 2 is between when they give it to the DOJ and when they just vote it in. So rather than create whole new different names, I'm just saying pre-transition phase 1 and pre-transition phase 2, and we're talking about phase 2 here. Does that make sense? I'm looking at Co-Chair Aiken, who I think came up with this terminology.
I understand the difference in the timeline, but I don't understand the importance of defining them separately. Would you mind just clarifying that for me?
Well, I understand what you're talking about. I just read this paragraph and I had to think about it 2 or 3 times to understand that this is part of that chunk that starts in September 1st, but it really won't happen until probably November 1st. So I think if we define it that way, then it'll be easier to follow our instructions. I think that's part of what we were hearing from CRC, is that they really want the timeline to be clear. And I think we can be clearer by describing that as phase 1 and phase 2.
Thank you. I'm going to bring staff into this.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask maybe for a little more clarity, because the there are actually three distinct timeframes that are mentioned in the settlement agreement. There's the 60-day period where the city council reviews the proposals from the PAC and eventually sends on the code change package and the settlement agreement package to the DOJ and court. There's a second phase which has no particular timeline for it, where the DOJ and the court review these. And then there's a 21-day period after that where they send it back to the city council. The city council votes on the final settlement agreement amendment text, as well as the city code package. And that has to be done within 21 days. And the date in which they do that is the way that this is written, day 0 for the transition period. So just wanted to suggest, whatever terminology, just to be clear about that and how those may or may not align with those three distinct periods of time written in the settlement agreement.
Thank you, staff. Co-chair Faith.
Thanks, Samir. I think as we explain it further, it's more confusing. So I wonder if that's helpful of like pre-transition is like pre-transition 1 is pre-DOJ, moot, and then pre-transition 2 is 21 days post DOJ. Question mark?
Commissioner Dan.
You skipped over the entire time that the DOJ has it. So pre-transition 1, I'm saying, is those 60 days that staff was describing, and then everything else, the unknown period of time plus the 21 days is phase 2. Because really, that 21 days, the city council is considering not much. The transition team's not going to be able to do very much until the city council votes on the whole thing anyway. So all of it's going to be happening between sending it to the DOJ and when that wraps up. So just 2 phases, even though part 2 has those 2 distinct phases staff described.
All right, any other questions, thoughts around this? Let's keep moving. Thank you for the note-taking, staff.
Yeah, fastest typer.
I know, right? B2, transition staff.
Okay, B2A, during the pre-transition period, the city shall create a transition staff to facilitate the early stages of the transition period. Prior to a director being hired. The transition staff shall be managed by a City of Portland employee referred to as the transition manager, who is preferably someone familiar with the work of the Police Accountability Commission. B, transition staff positions may be transferred to the Oversight Board upon the hiring of the director at the director's discretion. Remaining transition staff positions will sunset after the appointment and training of the director.
Let's look at those 2 sections. Any comments, questions? If there aren't any, let's move on. Can we move on? Thank you so much. Section C.
The city attorney's office shall ensure that the transition manager is present for any mediation with the U.S. Department of Justice related to the implementation of the Oversight Board. The Bureau of Human Resources shall ensure that the transition manager is present for any mediation with collective bargaining units related to the implementation of the Oversight Board. These responsibilities will be transferred to the director upon their hiring.
Any comments or questions? Can we move? Oh, Commissioner Dan?
I'm trying to wait for other people to raise their hands. So the document that was worked on in an earlier phase that described the board's interaction with labor negotiations, envisioned a board member sitting in on these negotiations. I think it's a great idea to have somebody in there because the board won't exist yet to help design this. But I think that a community member should be there too. So somebody, from the volunteer team should also be in that room.
In section C, so you would say,
Right. So instead of just saying the transition manager, say the transition manager and a member of the transition volunteers, if that's what we're calling it. I don't have all the paper. Oh, transition volunteers. Yeah, they're the same page. There it is. Yeah.
great, thank you so much. Commissioner Monica.
I think I would echo that thought. It feels like that would definitely equalize things and make it feel more community-based.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Monica. Any other thoughts? Can we move on? Very good, we'll do that. And so co-chairs, I'd like to do a time check. We're at 8:53. I'm not sure how much longer section B is. So I suggest that we keep going until we're done with this document this evening.
Yeah, I think we can do that because I think section A is pretty much the timeline and encompasses a lot of what we've already talked about. So, and I don't think there's that much left in section B.
Fabulous.
So.
Fantastic. Just wanted to check in. Let's keep going.
B3, transition volunteers. During the pre-transition period, the city shall also create a group of up to 12 transition volunteers who are not interested in being on the new board. These volunteers will be drawn from former members of the PAC and current or former members of the CR Citizen Review Committee and any other volunteer entity being sunsetted as part of board implementation. City Council shall appoint the transition volunteers, a process that transition staff will coordinate. B, the transition volunteer group shall sunset after the appointment and training of the first oversight board members.
Any questions or concerns? Commissioner Dan?
Well, there's a flag here of a comment, well, there was in the older version, of a comment I made last time to add some time for the volunteer group. But I think if we put the words completion of in front of training, so it says after the appointment and completion of training of the first oversight board members, I think that'll address my concern. And that way, the volunteers stick around until the new board's ready to get out of the nest and fly on their own.
Very good. Thank you so much. Co-chair Faith.
I loved Chair Abalos's suggestion of, is there a way to bypass city council for this group? And if that's the case, I guess my question to staff is, maybe this is a garden plot, is that politically tenable for us to, can we try that?
So you're wondering about, okay, staff?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a garden plot. I'm also not sure. I think it'd be a speculative to guess on that without any particular information from council staff or anyone right now. There are methods that, exist in the city to do that, that you can explore. One of them's in one of the previous comments over there. But yeah, I think happy to try and ask and get info, but there is no information at present.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Monica.
If we're drawing from former members of the PAC and the CRC, those are volunteers that have already been appointed for these roles. So maybe that would be a way to say, these are people that have already gone through the process and we're just continuing their volunteer service. Just a thought.
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts, comments? Can we move on? Wonderful, thank you. I guess we're B4, budget access.
Before A, to accomplish the timeline outlined in this document, several factors are reliant on having necessary budget available to staff the transition. The Oversight Board will have access to its budget on day one of the transition period, but due to potential delays in the timeline, if funding is delayed, the transition would be more feasible if a budget allocation is available prior to that date. If funding is not in place, work cannot begin until day one, and the work outlined here will be significantly delayed. These delays could place the city out of compliance with the charter and potentially the settlement agreement.
Any comments or questions? Can we move on? Thank you.
B, the timeline outlined in the recommendations of this document assume that necessary budget and support will be in place to accomplish the transition. Necessary budget and support includes, at a minimum, 1, authorization for 3 staff positions, including the transition manager, 2, funding for outreach, recruitment, technology, and transition staff of at least $700,000 of the Oversight Board's budget allocation for the transition fiscal year or years. Access to this funding will be made available to the transition staff upon their appointment, even if it occurs during the pre-transition period. C, remaining portions of the Oversight Board's budget allocation for the fiscal years in which the board members are appointed and the director is hired would remain accessible to the board and director.
Any comments, questions, Commissioner Angie?
I just have a question going back to the actual appointment of the transition team. I know that we're trying to figure out a way to have them appointed as quickly as possible, because so much more depends on them being appointed. You know, they can't be involved with the negotiations with the DOJ or any of those things. And they can't be part of hiring the new board. And we're trying to get that hired as quickly as possible. And they're supposed to be the people that are trying to get that accomplished, that transition team. Could we propose that because it's before the director is hired, could we propose that the manager, the transition team manager, is that what that position was called, appoint at least part of the transition team?
Co-chairs, thoughts, or staff? Staff?
You can absolutely propose that. It's up to you whether you want to and all that. Whether the subcommittee thinks it's a good idea or not, but you're definitely allowed to.
Great.
I'm proposing that right now, but I know that is a very long, that might be more of a discussion, but that isn't what I am proposing.
Commissioner Dan?
Well, I'm stuck on a similar timeline question, which is I got a little confused when I read B subsection 2 about the $700,000. That's for money for the transition staff to use to operate the transition phase, the pre-transition phase and the transition phase. But B1 seeks to authorize, I think it means authorization to fund 3 staff positions, including the transition manager, right?
Yes.
And it seems like somebody has to hire that transition manager, and that the appointment of the volunteers and the hiring of that transition manager should all happen at the same time. So this comes back to a question that Co-Chair McDowell asked me a while back, which is who is doing all this? Who is hiring the staff first, and who is doing that? And finally, just getting back to my assertion before that we should be more pushy about having this happen here. Instead of saying even if it occurs during the pre-transition period, it should say which PAC recommends occur during the pre-transition period.
All right, co-chairs?
Yeah, I think I don't know if Co-Chair Catherine and staff have other thoughts, but it feels like some of these Angie, that's a good suggestion. It feels like some of these details we should write out a little bit and think through. So my suggestion would be co-chairs can work that out a little bit and bring it to the next meeting.
Beautiful, thank you.
I agree.
Beautiful. Staff?
Yeah, I think prior to the last meeting, there was some text proposed by, there wasn't a consensus on whether or not the goal was of the subcommittee, which is still not final, but at least now it seems closer to consensus of trying to pursue having some of these tasks start in the pre-transition period. So there's some text that has that was written prior to that. So just to clarify, in the event that the group wants to have a separate pool of money, there's ways to word it that way. And if the way it's worded right now is it seems to be that it would be pulled from the transition year forward into the pre-transition period. And that would, it would just be accessing the money earlier. So it's something that you can write in either way. It's just a question of what the goal is of what's being asked for, whether it's $700,000 of new money during just to get the transition started, or whether it's part of that full allocation of the budget to the oversight board that would take effect upon approval of the city code package, which is to say day one. And then the other thing, just oversimplifying, authorization and funding are two different things. Within the city, you can have a short-term position that's authorized for longer, but not funded necessarily, which is something that the PAC is currently experiencing, should note, in its staffing. But yeah, it's two different concepts. So that's something just to clarify without getting too deep into the weeds on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this section? Can we move on? Very good. Let's continue. Overview of timeline.
Okay, so A1 is the pre-transition council initial review, and I'm not going to read the dates. The PAC presents work to council. The council proposes the settlement agreement amendments allowing for implementation of the oversight board. B, US DOJ and US court review, estimated 6 to 7 months. C, council final review, 21 days. Council approves final text of settlement agreement amendments, and council votes on PAC code change recommendations. A2 is the transition.
Catherine, you missed B.
Did I skip something?
Yeah. Right there. Yeah, that one.
Oh, council appoints transition team and members. Sorry. So we have that occurring within that 6 to 7 month period, which I guess Dan was talking about that being part of phase 2 of the pre-transition.
Yes.
Okay. So sorry, I was just trying to be mindful of the time and read this quickly. Transition. A2, subsection A, this is a period of 1 year at maximum, beginning after the city council approves the code change, creating the oversight board, and all other legal requirements have been met. At this point, the oversight board will officially exist, but will not yet have members appointed nor staff hired. B, a transition team will manage the oversight board on an interim basis, including board member recruitment and onboarding and director application management. C, during this period, city council appoints the first board members who will work to hire the director and implement the remaining portions of this transition plan. D, during this period, the oversight board will hire the first director who will implement the remaining portion of this transition plan. E, during this period, the director will hire other staff, prioritizing intake, navigators, and investigators. F, during this period, the Oversight Board will draft foundational board documents, including bylaws and other necessary documents. A3, post-transition. This period begins at most 1 year and 1 day after City Council approves the code change recommendation creating the Oversight Board. The PAC's working estimate for this timeframe is July 1st, 2025. Subsection B, beginning on this date, new complaints alleging administrative misconduct will no longer go to IPR, but will instead go to the Oversight Board. IPR and CRC, as well as any other portions of the current system, which will be sunsetted as part of the Oversight Board implementation, will begin wrapping up their existing work and concluding during this period. And that's the end of subsection A.
Any comments or questions for subsection A? Commissioner Dan?
So just kind of going along with, let's hurry this process along. The part in A2A talking about other legal requirements being met, to the extent that those can be hashed out in the pre-transition phase, I think that would be helpful for us to suggest that that happen, so that day one, we're not having legal arguments. And that's kind of envisioned by the sitting in on the negotiations part. Looks like C, D, E, and F of A2 all start with during this period. So there, maybe there's a way to combine that so it doesn't say that over and over again. That's not a big comment. And then A3A, the PAC's working estimate for the start of this time frame is July 1, 2025. I think makes it clearer, because I didn't really understand what that meant until I added those words.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Any other thoughts? Comments, concerns? Is there anything else that we have to address in this document? I guess not. Thank you so much. So I will move us to public comment. I would like to invite the public to comment on anything that has been discussed today, or to bring forward any personal stories. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 3 minutes in length, and to raise their hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. Are there any people who would like to participate in public comment? I see that there are Q&As, but I do not see any hands raised. Okay. No hands seen. Very good. Then we shall move on. Thank you so much. And we will move to next steps. Staff, would you like to help us move into next steps?
Yes, so this is the first version of the document, which is a draft document. So you'll see all changes from here on out in track changes. This document will be recirculated to members, and the ability for members to send in documents, have them aggregated, and the document recirculated with a bunch of different track changes shown before the next meeting. Also, as you have seen in full commission, but also in the past in the subcommittees, as they near the end of their work, we'll probably end up putting some of these in order to discuss, with the items that'll take the longest time or are anticipated to do so towards the later portion of it. Many of these proposed changes were not asked for consensus today, but seemed like there may be consensus around many of those. And certainly for many of the others, someone may propose text that is a consensus solution to something that is currently a more tricky conceptual conversation. So The idea is that the document will be recirculated and asking for those proposed changes within the next 2-ish days. And then having those be collected by about a week from today. So everyone will have at least 5-6 days to look at it so that it can be recirculated in advance of the next meeting. There is currently only one meeting of the subcommittee scheduled left, as well as a potential backup one. We're going to look at the calendar with co-chairs and see if that's possible. The goal to the timeline for considering that was to look after this meeting. And so just to kind of get an idea of how much time will be needed. And then the other thing that I should mention is that there are a couple of things that may come over from the other subcommittee. They have a draft that they are looking at for the first time tomorrow. It has some potential text in there that might require, if they determine that something changes, when and how it changes might be something that needs to get addressed here. They may also have text that comes with that decision that may be helpful. So we'll make sure that members of the subcommittees as well as co-chairs are communicating about that. They have a meeting tomorrow and another meeting next Tuesday, by which time hopefully they will be done. So just wanted to flag that for everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, staff. Now up next, I believe, is garden plot. This is a time for facilitators, co-chairs, and staff to summarize any items already brought up today but didn't fit into today's agenda. We'll recap those items here and use them in developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss any items, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so these items can be addressed. Co-chairs, are there any garden plot items that you would like to bring up?
Not from me, thank you.
Okay, thank you. None from Faith either. Staff, do you have any?
No, thank you.
And I don't have any either, so very good, thank you. So we will continue then with our adjournment. As a reminder, you can now submit advance public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. Next slide. Thank you all who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you to our interpreters and to our briefers. Such good conversation. Finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. If you've not already done so, please sign up for emails. Please also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. The next meeting of the full commission is scheduled for this Thursday, June 15th. The other subcommittee, the subcommittee on broader systems meets tomorrow at 7, and this subcommittee has one remaining scheduled meeting currently on June 26th. It is now 9:15 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so very much.
Great meeting, everyone.
Thank you all for all the work. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.